Hello, my name is Richard Harbridge. I'm a Microsoft MVP and someone who speaks about employee experience quite a bit. I wanted to give you insight into what Viva Pulse is, where it's come from, and where it's going. So with that, let's dive right in.
2Lead is a remote-first company based out of Canada.
What makes a world-class Microsoft 365 intranet and digital workplace?
Microsoft Pulse, or Microsoft Viva Pulse, is actually coming from a place many of us may have heard about in the past, and that is through the acquisition of GLINT. Microsoft Viva Pulse provides us the ability to reach out on a more regular rhythm with employees. If you don't know about GLINT, here's the general idea. We want to create a feedback-oriented culture model. Right now, if you take an approach where on an annualized basis or something really long like that, where you do employee satisfaction surveys, you're often missing this very significant opportunity where we can make changes earlier and more frequently instead of this very long lagging indicator. We can have a more interactive insight in the organization on employee engagement, on well-being, on a variety of other metrics. And so this is where organizations have adopted something like GLINT, let's say, to enable that experience. And it is true that Microsoft GLINT and Microsoft Viva already have a series of different ways in which they're integrated. As an example, one of my favorite ones that you can kind of see as a representation here is the way Microsoft Viva Insights works with GLINT today. So if you don't know this, Microsoft Viva Insights allows for you to get digital signal analysis. That means that I can go and see how managers spend time with reports, right? Do you have one-on-one meetings with them, using Teams and other tools? We can see how much, communication, how much meeting time do you have with your manager? And if we see those types of signals, we might be able to then analyze it further, again, using Viva Insights based on work mode. Is it that you spend more time with mostly on-site employees? By the way, you probably do, versus mostly remote. Are there things we want to nudge or change from an organizational perspective? When you pair that with feedback data from something like GLINT, you get something really robust, because not only do you know that there are these potential insights that might nudge how you might want to encourage manager behavior or things like that, but we can also see things like how do people feel about their manager, how connected do they feel to the company, to their manager, and to other things. So in that particular example, when we combine those two digital insights that are driven from digital behavior, as well as feedback insights that are driven from user feedback, employee feedback, we actually get a much richer story. And that's really the value of GLINT. Now, the problem with this is that it can actually be hard to get that feedback regularly, even with great tools like GLINT, because we want that feedback to be unintrusive. We want it to be in the flow of work, and we want more people to reach out and get that feedback, right? We don't want it to always be from an organizational sort of top-down motion. And that's really where Viva Pulse is coming from. Where we have Viva Pulse, it allows people who want to use this type of platform, who use GLINT, let's say, to have, again, this is part of the Viva suite that'll be added for you. If you have GLINT, right, you'll be able to start to use this to actually send pulses to a targeted collections of users and more. This means that I could ask my team, what is making us successful in a project context, a very detailed level scenario. Or I could do something at a broader level, my entire department or my entire division or business unit. What's working for you guys from a well-being perspective? So the level that we can do this from and the flexibility we have is enormous. The fact that we can do this so easily is also something that's quite a benefit. Remember that these are meant to be chronologically relevant. We start with a pulse, and then we continue to resend that pulse on a regular basis to get insights over time, or we might create variations of that pulse because we've learned some things and we might want to look at different types of feedback from employees. So when you look at these types of pulses, yes, of course, that there's expirations, there's sense of timelines, but they can also be shared. An important concept here is the ability to collaborate together on how do we get the responses that we're looking for. What is the feedback I've provided? What pulses have I myself been a part of and provided? Again, providing assurance that I can see my own experiences and that the time I spend providing feedback is something that's well spent because it allows me to reflect in my own work experiences over time. Another key concept within Viva Pulse is the ability that we can create these pulses without necessarily the prerequisite HR or employee engagement or all this digital knowledge that people might have today. As an example, you may not know that it's really useful to use a 1 to 5 ranking when you ask a question, because that allows us to see trend information over time. If we just have a yes or no question, it allows for basically us only to see how many yeses and how many nos, and if that's changing. But if we say, between 1 and 5, if you're in agreement, then that gives us a sense of like, oh, it's trending in a positive direction. And so that can be very, very helpful. Another consideration with these pulses, and the fact that it's so easy to create these questions, and I don't need to know how to write the questions, and I don't need to know any of that really to create effective pulses, means that it's much more accessible for people. Remember, one of the goals with this is to be able to enable people to use pulses in more frequently, in a way that, again, is not taxing for the end users or the employees that are going to consume those pulses and provide that feedback. We want to make it easier as well. And that's because there's a lot of scenarios where we might want to plan for a pulse. Maybe we're making a departmental change and we want to get a pulse around that timing before and after to kind of see if there's any differences, a benchmark and afterwards. Perhaps you have an organizational change that's coming and you want to time it with that. Perhaps it's something as simple as like rolling out a new technology and you want to get feedback around that. There's so many ways to use these tools where it can provide that insight and capability. And the fact that it provides a consistent way in which we create these and manage them and work on them is a huge win. In addition to this, that employee experience side, how does the employee experience that pulse survey or feedback request is really important. And in this way, it's in the flow of your work. You're inside of Teams, you see that pulse request, you can get started right from there. When you get started from that pulse, again, it's meant to be easy and seamless to fill out those experiences. And when we fill that information out, of course, on the back end, we can have the people who created those pulses get insights around it. What was the output of that pulse? How many people participated in it? Again, many times you're not going to get full participation. That wasn't the goal. You just want more information than you have today, especially if there's people who have concerns or risks. They might be more comfortable sharing that. Another key consideration is understanding how anonymity and privacy works with these types of surveys. A lot of times the goal is to make it private. We want to make sure that everyone has a voice and they don't have to feel like they're in danger of being called out or at risk when they share that type of feedback. And so this is done in a way just like Viva Insights is for privacy support. So this means that I can not only have that feedback come in, but I can also ensure that the managers and other people aren't taking this information and maybe doing the wrong kinds of behaviors, or at least reducing the chances of those kinds of actions. And so in this example, we can see in this pattern, we have this resend pulse. So we've sent this pulse before, and we see that there's differences in the previous period, right, that we've done this pulse in. We actually see that stress has increased and that people feel like they're more able to cope with stress. So that's good. And the suggestions, again, for how could we potentially improve how we cope with stress would be where people vote on those as well. So more flexibility in where I work, when I work is really helpful and is leading, perhaps one of the biggest things that's driving the change in a positive increase in stress. And if we look at the negatives, like the boundaries one, perhaps, again, we're not just saying, hey, there is this problem where it's hard to disconnect from work during non-work time, or it's hard to get what we need. Perhaps more focused time during work hours means that there's less of that overload after we're done our work, right? Where it's like, oh, now that we've had all those meetings, I actually have to get my, quote unquote work done. And that means I'm going to have to work a little bit of time in the evening or do something like that off my work hours. So not only are we getting this insight, but we're also potentially enabling people to give us feedback in a way that's constructive and actionable. And that's a really important consequence to GLINT, Pulse, and these innovations from the industry. One last comment, the top there is, those examples where you can kind of get insight into what suggestions or feedback is provided. But keep in mind that the rest of the Viva portfolio also aligns with this. So using Viva goals and redefining goals and objectives to design around some of these things can be a great way to improve this, right? Defining better expectations might be one of the main problems with ability to choose when and where I work, or some other, consideration, a question that you're asking. And so then you can potentially look at that and say, what if we could potentially set expectations more effectively with Viva goals and use Viva goals to support that problem area? So this is stuff that you can do today. Now, lastly, when you do these pulse reports, one of the biggest mistakes organizations make when they do great employee satisfaction, employee engagement surveys, other things like that, is they often don't share the data quickly quickly with those who provided that information, and they don't share it in a easy to consume, comprehensive way, because it takes time and money and energy to do that. Here, you actually have a really easy way to reshare that information. Remember, it's anonymous. Many of these are anonymous. So this particular set is anonymous. So it's really easy for me to then push it back out and say, here's what you guys told us. Right. And maybe comment with, all the other tools we have available, inside of Teams with a threaded conversation, or make it a news post and take that material and post it somewhere else. You can do it in a variety of ways. And that allows for you to share, what actions we're taking. We heard you, right? People want to be seen, heard, acknowledged, right? And appreciated. That is the driver for employee connectivity. And if you look at something like Pulse, it ensures that they are heard and seen. It ensures that their concerns and stresses and issues are acknowledged. It also helps people if they feel like, I'm alone. That's useful insight for both sides, for the manager and the employee, or the leader and the employee, because in that instance, I can see, I really don't feel the same as the wide variety of my peers, right? It's from an anonymous perspective, that can be really helpful, because maybe that makes a reflection on what work am I doing? What's my job role? What's different, right, about my own personal experiences, my work experiences, etc., than my peers. And then that allows for greater actionability for people that can make that change, right, and improve that outcome. So again, I hope this has been helpful for you. Viva Pulse is actually a really big deal, a very exciting set of experiences that I think a lot of customers are going to get a lot of value out of. And if you've never heard of GLINT, and you've never heard of how Viva Insights, digital and signal analysis supports things like these, now you've got some more research and things to look into. Bye for now, everyone, and I hope this has helped.